Teaching While Queer is a podcast for LGBTQIA plus teachers, administrators, and well, anyone who works in academia to share their stories. Hi, my name is Brian Stanton, a queer theater educator in San Antonio, Texas. Each week, I bring you stories from around the world centered on the experiences of LGBTQIA folks in academia. Thank you for joining me on this journey and enjoy Teaching While Queer. Welcome back to Teaching Why Queer podcast. My name is Brian Stanton, and I am your host. Today's episode, I have the joy of talking with Michael Musgrave-Perkins. Michael, why don't you take a second to go ahead and introduce yourself?
All right. Hello. As Brian said, I'm Michael Musgrave-Perkins. I am the theater department chair at Grand Center Arts Academy in St. Louis, Missouri. I have been teaching there. This will be my 5th year teaching at that particular school. I teach mostly 9th through 12th grade, but I do have a couple of our middle school grades. Our school is a 6th through 12 public charter school with 4 arts pathways of visual art, dance, music, and of course theater. So I teach all of the tech classes. I am also the technical director and theater manager for the historic Sun Theater, which we rent out to other institutions, but we also host renting events. People come in, they'll put up a couple weekend shows, and so I have to be the person to do that, and then I will lean on my student crew to help me out sometimes. I also teach a couple acting classes wherever it's needed, because I am one of 3 theater teachers at our school, which is a gift, such a gift to have. And because I know that not everybody gets that, and so try to remain grateful for such things. I also co-sponsor our school's GSA. We have shifted away from calling it like the Gay Straight Alliance, because I think that's kind of an outdated phrase, and so we now are the Gender Sexualities Alliance. So that terminology is a lot more inclusive. I say co-sponsor because as much as I love the students, I have to have at least one other faculty person helping me, because if we're meeting, I'm usually kind of ducking in and out and doing other theater related things. So a lot of juggling there. My pronouns are he, him. I am a cisgender gay man, which I feel is just kind of a bit plain, I guess, or just, I'm like, oh, that's not exciting. I can remember when that was like shocking and oh my gosh, and like, no, I'm just cis. That's okay though. I'm happy to be the boring old gay guy. But because that shows how far we've come, right? That can show like, oh yeah, I can. This is just kind of more of accepted, but I really want to help students kind of branch out and see, where on the gender spectrum or the sexuality spectrum they actually fall. So I'm happy to be a conduit for that. Did I get too far off topic now? I think.
Oh no, that's great. Did you grow up in the Midwest?
I sort of. So I was born in St. Louis. I grew up in Houston and Memphis as well. And then I ended up finishing high school in St. Louis. Lots of moving around by choice or otherwise, not always my choice, but yeah, once I finished high school in St. Louis, I went to undergrad at Lindenwood University, which is in St. Charles, Missouri, which is about 30 minutes away from downtown St. Louis. And I have a BFA in directing theater. So when I got into teaching, it was sort of something that I didn't specifically pursue, but one where I discovered a passion for arts education. And that was born out of a senior internship that I had in undergrad, where I was a paid touring actor at the St. Louis Shakespeare Festival. Um, what we did was we I was one of 5 actors that got in a van, and we had all of our sets and costumes and stuff in a van, and we drove around to area schools. We performed a show, we taught some workshops, and I really enjoyed that. I loved teaching those workshops and helping students realize how they can become better performers. And when you become a better, I'm sure I can talk about this later, but when you become a better theater artist, whether on stage or backstage, I think there's a lot of what's called portable skills. So you don't just have to be a professional theater artist, like we are, but you get to just use those in whatever field you end up going into. How to speak in public, how to fix something that's broken, because techies are always fixing stuff that's broken all the time. So there's a lot of ways that you could do it. You could become better people if you're good at theater. I think you're a good human.
I love that. So, with all the moving around, what was your experience like growing up as a young gay boy?
Um, I didn't know I was a young gay boy for a while. Um, I it was something that I was really self-conscious about. Um, gosh, because I first started to get like the inklings of that I felt different in like middle school. Like I'm thinking like 6th grade, so I'm still in Houston by that time. Didn't really feel confident enough to really act on it. I didn't know what to call it. Um,
Yeah.
but I knew that I'm like, nah. It started with, nah, I don't like girls. Um, but I responded to, like male friends or just males in general. Like, oh, that's interesting. Um, but I still to be like, I'm not talking to anybody about it, because that would just make me feel, that would make me weird, right? Um, so that was not a healthy way. Now looking back on it, that was not a healthy way to do it. But I also didn't feel like I had people who would have that same experience, who could identify like where I was coming from. Um, so that kind of manifested into splitting off some of my identity. Like I would have the outward behavior, um, but then I would have this like other, way more private side of things that also was not healthy. Because let's put it this way, when you become a teenager, so I'm talking like 9th or 10th grade, now I've moved up to St. Louis, I'm staying with my aunt and uncle. They were my guardians. um we had a shared computer, and
Mhm.
I did not clear my internet history when I should
It's a
have.
scandal. Scandal right
Yes,
there.
scandalous. That's about as delicately as I can put it in a podcast setting. Um, so the story of so I never came out. Whenever we get to like coming out days or coming out stories, like I didn't come out. I didn't get the choice. I was outed. Um, so I'm like, all right, here we go. And there was a lot of just uh emotions flying around. Um, that my mom, who was in the other room, has probably been the most supportive in my entire family about it. That's why I'm staying with her, and that's why I love. Side note, for listeners, Brian and I are both members of the Summer MA for Theater Educators at the University of Houston. So the
Shameless
reason that I love,
plugs. Woo.
right, right, but the reason I'm here, and the reason why I thought, oh, this is like planets aligning type of thing, is, oh, I get to earn my master's degree, but it's a place where I grew up. It's also really fun experiencing Houston, as someone in their mid to late 30s, as
Mhm.
opposed to my Houston experience when I was mostly in like, elementary and middle school. It's really different. So,
Yeah.
anyway, um, but yeah, when I was outed, the story behind it is wild. So let me set the stage for you. The high school friends that I had, were all they all went to the same Baptist church, which I did not go to. I was just around it in general. I was adjacent to it. So the Baptist church put on what's called a judgment house. Have you ever heard of this?
No, but that is very ominous.
Oh yeah. Oh, it doesn't stop there. I still have the script for this, by the way, somewhere at home. Sometime like later on, I should send it to you because it is fantastically crazy. Imagine a haunted house, but for Jesus. Um,
Okay. Okay.
so what would happen is it's kind of like what Sleep No More, I guess, would have become. So you would go in, they would take groups of people through the church, and each room of the church was converted into like a small theater space. Me and my other friends were recruited because I'm like, oh, we do theater at school, so y'all, we need actors. Let's have them do it. So as each group goes through, you follow the story of a brother and sister, and I don't remember their names, so we'll just call them brother and sister. Um, Brother is always goes to church, and he's a really nice boy and does everything that his parents tell him to do. The sister is a bit of a rebel, and she likes
Wow.
going out and partying, and she smokes cigarettes and acts promiscuously, and is, I guess, just sinful, with a
I am
capital S.
already passing judgment. I am
Right,
already sitting here going like the
right.
misogyny.
Well,
Wow.
well, you go into the next room, and then you find out that the sister had been drinking, and she decides to drive with her brother in the car, and they get into a horrible car accident, and they both die. They
Oh
die.
no.
Yes. And so the next room you go into, the sister is in hell. Of our thespian troupe, our treasurer or secretary, one of those, he was dating the president of our thespian troupe. He was Satan. He played the fucking devil. So I have a friend who's just like, oh yeah, he's over there playing the devil. And then my role was I played the brother when he went to heaven. And so they had
How exciting
converted
for
the
you.
church sanctuary. They had converted the church sanctuary into heaven. And we had this like um, youth pastor Jesus. So he was the guy who had like the really, because this is 2001 or two. Um, so he had like the really short hair that was combed forward, and you had like these little baby bangs,
Oh yeah.
and they put him
Pre
on a white
Bieber.
rope. Huh?
Pre
What?
Bieber. Pre
Yeah,
Justin Bieber, yeah.
yeah. And then he
This is
tried
to
to
push
look grown.
down and tilt.
Yeah, he tried to look
Yeah.
grown up and had like a goatee and stuff, and so that he was Jesus.
Mm.
And so my line was, uh, like I just had to step forward and hug him and say, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be okay, or something like that. So we would have to do that little bit every like 15 minutes or so as they brought groups through.
Uh-huh.
And they had like the dry ice machines and the early 2000s Christian rock kind of lightly playing
Mm.
in the background. Because it was there was a lot of theatricality to it. So I'm in the middle of doing that. And then when we're in like the kitchen area, that was like our green room or staging area, my uncle, who I was living with, bursts in and says, "You need to come with me now. We're leaving." I'm like, "What? We're in the middle of it." Nope, leave now. So we're sitting in the car, very tense ride home. And he goes, "You want to know what I found on the computer?" I'm like, "I know what you found on the computer. If this is what it is, I know what you're talking about." And I was like immediately ashamed and just very apologetic. And oh my God, this is like my, stomach dropped, right? um it was just awful. And so that quickly started making the rounds, not at my school, but they people started to be curious. I'm like, why was he taken out of the just so it's just the irony of I'm in a judgment house and this,
And then this
you
happens.
know,
It's like
like
Jesus knew.
right. So that began just a very antagonistic relationship with any organized religion, and that I think that's fair. um I will say that the church I go to now, very open, very accepting. um they're even with folks who are older, but they're just way more loving, and I think that kind of gets to what religion should be about. It's not telling people what to do, it's just how to be a better person. And I kind of wish that more churches would get on that. The Baptists certainly weren't. No.
Yeah.
um
We were
so
chatting right before we started recording, and I said how intriguing it was going to be to listen to your story, considering that I grew up in Southern California and you grew up in various places in the South and the Midwest. And right off the bat, we have parallels. When I was 13, the internet betrayed me, but not in the same way. It was the days of dial up, and for you younger people, before the internet was fast, it was very slow,
oh
and
yes.
you would have to listen to this bong, beedong, 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 like sound for sometimes minutes that felt like hours. And
Mhm.
and you could only use the internet if nobody was using the phone. And
Yep.
so
Yep.
a friend of mine who was my boyfriend at the time, he was 16, I was 13, I was going to be 14 in a week when this situation happened. Um, and we were chatting on AOL Instant Messenger, throwback. Um, he went downstairs to unplug the internet so his mom could use the phone, who went upstairs and spied our conversation. And
Oh
then
no.
outed both of us and went on a whole moral rampage for several days.
How dare you.
So it's wild. It's wild that we can have these parallel experiences in around the
Right.
same time frame, um, in different parts of the country.
Oh yeah. It's a very common experience. I think that especially just queer people in the early 2000s, that's
Uh-huh.
what we had as a resource. I kind of wish I knew more supportive people that I could I could confide in and could help kind of guide me through all of that, who had been through similar experiences, pre-internet. Um,
Uh-huh.
and you look at the broad, like, historical uh events. We're coming off of the other side of the AIDS epidemic, and so I think there's
Hmm.
still, in the early 2000s, and even now, there's still like that stigma around queerness, or the word queer in general, which I'm glad that has been like reclaimed,
Hmm.
um in large part. But yeah, there's just so many parallels, and that's really what I want to be for, my students, and especially the students in my GSA. They'd be like, I can't speak it specifically to your experience, but I can at least be an example, I guess. How do I use my own traumatic experiences to make sure that other students don't have to go through that? How
Yep.
can they come out, or how can they discover things about themselves, qualities about themselves, that people are going to accept, rather than make them feel ashamed that they are a certain way. And the first thing I do is I go make sure that you don't let anyone tell you that you're choosing to be an NB today. No, you don't choose. That is just, especially at that age, because I
Yeah,
could
words are important, the way you describe it.
yeah, it's a discovery. It's not, oh, I'm gonna choose to be trans today. I'm like, no, that you're just
This morning I
figuring out.
woke up and I was trans. No,
Right.
that's
Because I had a student who her her pronouns were he him for about a year, but then like through therapy and they healthy, that not like conversion therapy, like,
mhm.
god, ugh, not through that, but through counseling, discovered that her pronouns were she her, and so that changed, but it wasn't a choice, it wasn't like
Right.
a conscious, okay, I'm going to switch this off. It took a lot of like soul searching and growing up, and when
Yeah.
we deal with high school students, that is so in flux. I'm like, you don't know, your brain isn't finished yet. You're not
No.
done cooking, as my husband likes to say, because I'll frequently, if I'm griping about a student, he's very good about reminding me. I'm like, they're not done cooking yet, so they're not set in this. The identity that they have now is not going to be the identity that they have forever. I mean, I think the two of us seem like pretty prime examples of that. Like, the person I was in high school is not the person that I am now at all.
Absolutely. It's funny because
Most,
when my husband and I started looking into the adoption process, we were talking with some like random woman at the airport or something like that. And she's like, I just want to warn you that between the ages of 15 and 26 are the dumb years. Um, and your kids will just be like, will completely not listen to reason, and then they will come to their senses. And I was like, thanks for the warning. So now when teenage things happen, I'm like,
the dumb years.
all right, it's the dumb years. Gotta remember it's the dumb years.
Yeah, yeah, and so you have to have a lot of grace, really, a lot of just leave ourselves open to experience, or their experiences, and that way we don't get quite so frustrated when they do something that you have to ask them, like, why did you do this, and their answer is often, I don't know, I just did it. um
Yeah.
but yeah, that that outing story, that quote unquote coming out story is, um I know, not unique to me, but I like using it as an example of, not everyone gets the privilege of coming out, and sometimes it's like that decision is made for us, and now it's there, and what do we do then? What do we do about it? And so I went back and forth several times where oh gosh, I kind of retreated back into my shell for a while and said, okay, they found out that time. How can I make sure that they don't find out? And so it was really just the waiting game of, how can I get out on my own? How do I not live under uh this oppressive situation? Because I can't be myself. I know I'm not. I was in like high school and beginning and going kind of into my freshman year of undergrad. um I was forced to go to, not the full conversion therapy type thing, not the we're going to send you away, um but I was basically, my guardians, or my aunt and uncle, leveraged the car that I was driving at the time. They're like, you're not
Oh,
going to get to drive the car if you don't go to this Christian family counselor. Ugh. Who sat there and told me with a straight face, straight, um,
mhm.
that I did not have a strong male influence in my formative years, and that's why I was acting the way I do. And I fundamentally disagreed with that, but I'm like, oh, I'm being forced to be here, so I'm just gonna listen. Um, and so because I'm in theater, I bullshitted him for an hour, a couple times. Um, but yeah, then I totaled that car. Um, on the way back from one of those appointments, not on purpose, Not on purpose. It just kind of worked out that way. I mean, I'm
Just
okay now.
poetic justice, though.
Yeah, I'm like, well, clearly Jesus doesn't want me going to this counselor. So I don't. So they didn't have the the leverage over me while I was an undergrad, and I was off, in college and wasn't living with them so much anymore. And so that's kind of when I started to branch out a little bit. And that's when I started dating when I was in college. I didn't dare date anyone while I was still in high school because again, most of my friend group went to that Baptist church. I didn't really know any out queer people in high school. And like my friend group in high school, these were the kind of folks who, as soon as we graduated, and even kind of before that, they were getting married, they were having kids, they were, like, whoa, I'm not even ready for that.
Wow.
Not even like, how? the serious high school sweetheart stuff going on, and I don't even know how they did it. Because yeah, I oof. Because I was not emotionally ready. I never dated anyone. Um, and just imagine, how if people weren't as judgmental, if people weren't as, on their freaking high horse, that I could have felt comfortable to be out and to kind of figure out who I was earlier rather than spending the better part of a decade going just like poking my little head out and then nope, going back in. Because yeah, it really, I think, delayed so many things, but it also got me to the place where I was able to meet the person who would eventually become my husband, but that wasn't until I was like 29. And that's a really fun story too, I can tell you that. But yeah, I really, coming back to like the subject of it, all these experiences just inform my teaching style because I tend to be very attuned to when a student is being a little discriminatory or in some cases just outright bullying. Like I am a staunch defender of queer students when they get bullied. Oh boy. I will not hesitate to not rudely but firmly tamp down on someone. Like, okay, I'm going to pause my lesson right now. We're going to have a discussion about how trans and non-binary and how all of that is a spectrum, and y'all need to get out of this gender binary situation. I will shout it from the friggin' mountaintops that it's not just man or woman, boy or girl, whatever. It's y'all fall somewhere on a spectrum, okay? So it's not we keep wanting to try to classify people. So yeah, it doesn't matter what grade they are either. I've had this conversation with like 6th and 7th graders, and they're very articulate. Like we're gonna pause right now. This is kind of a moment, and we're gonna have this discussion. And I'm gonna tell you, basically why you're wrong, but I'm gonna offer you some clarification. I'm not just gonna say, shut up, don't talk about that anymore, get out or whatever. It's an education moment. So I'm always very sensitive to that. And I that's kind of led me to become a sort of resource for many of the cis hetero people on staff, especially our counselors, because there's not a lot of queer teachers at our school. Even less so going forward, because even less so going forward because so many teachers are just leaving, and that's a larger issue. Yeah. And we could get you and I could probably talk at length about the staffing shortages that are going on everywhere. Oh my god,
that might be a whole podcast series,
right? Because I don't belong to a district. Our school is part of a network, I'm doing the rabbit ears for people that are listening, like the little quotes. Yeah, we're part of a network of charter schools. And our human resources director was just quoted in a article that was talking about staffing shortages. And he said, well, I guess we're just going to have to get creative. I'm like, you think? It was a very diplomatic way of putting it, but it's a simple thing of they have the same, just a dwindling pool of people to hire from, and it's we're going to go into the school year with some staffing shortages. Fortunately, not in my department, because I'm so excited. I'm really excited for this coming year, because all three of our theater teachers are gay. myself included. Um, uh, and the new person that we just hired, he comes from rural Missouri, like the Jefferson City area, which is the capital. Ugh. But he's been able to really to thrive out there. I think he's looking forward to being a little more open when he's teaching at our school, which does tend on. I said that there's not a lot of queer teachers, but it's a very progressive, liberal. I know that word is such a dirty word now, liberal, but yeah, they're not
dirty if you believe that.
Yeah, let's put it this way: they're not as conservative as other schools. Anyway, but I'm really excited for him because he's very energetic, and I get the sense that we're going to collaborate very well together. And he's a drag performer. Oh my god!
Yes,
He'll
be teaching makeup.
Right. Like seriously, as soon I know it's going to happen the first day that the students will discover that he's a drag performer, and they're going to lose their minds. They're going to be so excited, and he's going to be the new favorite, and everyone's going to love him, and it's going to be great. So like, yes, go talk to Zach. But yeah, I got to see him.
Like, go ahead.
Yeah, I mentioned, because he mentioned in the interview, he's like, oh, I'm performing at such and such place, because I asked him about it, and I ended up going to see him at the show the next day after he had got the news that he was hired. So I'm like, hey, I'm here. And, he was really happy about that. So I wanted to make sure that he is welcome also, and hopefully he feels good about coming to our fair school. But yeah, he was, we saw like 3 or 4 applicants that day, but he was the top choice unanimously amongst everyone who was in the room, and I was really happy that I got to be in the room for that. So yeah, I haven't asked him yet because he hasn't officially started, but I want him to be the co-sponsor with me on the GSA, and we're like, we can handle this, because I think we can use some of his seemingly boundless energy, because mine is not quite as boundless these days. I try to, especially during the pandemic. I mentioned this yesterday in another interview that I did about teaching, not for a podcast. This was for a gift card. I do it for Amazon.
Oh, okay.
And so it was like an MIT study where they were talking about the experiences teaching, and it really came. I have to set firm boundaries for like when I'm going to work on school stuff, and when I'm going to work on lesson plans or curriculum or whatever. It's like as soon as at a certain time hits, I have to put it down, or else it will drive me crazy.
Yeah, there's so many teachers who like dive in, and it's almost 24/7, and I'm just like, I cannot. Set hard boundaries to even like, I'm going to rehearse until 6, and then I'm going to go home and eat dinner with my family. And some people are like, what? We used to have rehearsals until 8 or 9 o'clock at night. I'm like, yeah, well, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, well, I try to operate by equity rules. It's like if I'm in the building, because I'm usually in our school building by 7 a.m., I don't want to rehearse past 7 the night before. Even if it's like a tech or a dress rehearsal, I'm like, listen, y'all, I need that 12-hour buffer. Because we have families, we have lives where we want to be full rich people. We don't want to burn out our students and then burn out ourselves, because that just leads to all kinds of problems. Yeah, you want to try and maintain that healthy relationship. And I that kind of makes me think of what I see others teachers doing, is where they are invested in students' lives, and I think I'm that way as well. However, I make a concerted effort not to blur that line between I think if I get too involved, I verge on becoming like, okay, I'm not a therapist. I'm not. I'm also not their parent. You know,
Yeah.
I have to be an educator first. Um, and sometimes I do miss that maybe they don't come to me for everything, but I'm kind of okay with that. I'm okay if I'm a resource, or if I'm um, a a valued person about a certain issue, but I don't need to be like the person that they go to for everything, because I think, oh, that diminishes the teacher student relationship a little bit. And I've seen teachers who get way too involved,
Hmm.
and then when things happen, it gets really emotional and it gets personal. And
I got some feedback my first year teaching it was from the seniors, which is always a tough group when you go into a new school, right? Because they've had all
right.
this experience with a previous teacher. And the feedback was, I just appreciate how drama free this year was, because the previous director was that person who was incredibly involved in people's lives in and out of the classroom. And I was like, yeah, like I care about you, but I don't need to know everything about your personal life. Like
Right.
I will be here for you if you need something, but this isn't the place where we air out our drama. Our drama is for the stage.
Right. And even then, it's not. And I try to express um healthy theater habits too, where you don't necessarily need to mine the depths of your trauma to make an effective
Yeah.
performance. It's like, if you're not ready to process that, like, I could talk about my experience, and that was one of our assignments. You'll remember this, the DNA play. Um,
Yeah.
that was what I did. I talked about my outing and how I was just mired in an online dating addiction that was awful, and then that's how I met my husband, and so that was like the path that I chose. Now I put that out there because
Parallels.
yeah, because I was ready to because I was ready to talk about it. I had kind of worked through all of that into a place where I was healthy enough to present it for my peers. Um, but not everyone is there, right?
Yeah.
Especially at our students' age, where they may not be able to articulate some of that. So you work with them in finding ways to express a character on stage, but it doesn't need to be exactly the circumstances that you're getting to. And that's one thing that I've really learned this summer, of how to express that, and how to get them to that place in a way that's going to be healthy for them, and not going to make them just like dissolve into a puddle after their
Yeah.
scene's done, um, or make them a little more confident and um, less apprehensive to perform in front of their students, because that's what that's what our job is.
Hmm.
That's what it comes down to, is we have to find that balance. I keep coming back to that. I'm trying to find balance in really everything, and it makes me sound like a monk or something when I say you must find balance in all things, but that's true. Um,
It is
because
true.
I want to be invested in their education and their humanity, but not so much that they're like texting me after school hours. I'm like, yep, nope, not gonna do that. um it's very unprofessional. um because yeah, you see examples of that everywhere, right? You see the, oh well, this teacher, because that gets into inappropriate relationships, and that's a whole, I feel, and I feel like queer people are often the targets of that. So
It's
when someone,
wild because we're often the targets, but not necessarily the people doing it.
yeah, exactly. And so there are people who have perpetuated that cycle of abuse because they perhaps were abused themselves, and that's just how they know it. And so they, as adults, will begin an inappropriate relationship with a minor, and it just, I don't need that. So I'm
Yeah.
like, that's a lot of where those boundaries come from. Um, especially in theater, I think it's already a conducive environment for that because we're sharing a lot of emotions and we get to a really vulnerable place. But then I think it's really healthy to come back to it and say, okay, now we can release that. We can go back to being professionals, or we can go back to uh, that stasis, I guess. Does that make sense? Am I getting too far off?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's fantastic. I think that working with students is incredibly difficult, especially right now because there's this highlight, this spotlight on queer teachers, um, and the word groomer is being thrown around left and right with
Yeah,
no real weight behind it, but it's just there to for defamation purposes.
right. Well, that's I try to emphasize this with students and staff because even the adults in our staff don't realize the historical parallels. Um, Queerness, whether someone's gay or lesbian, trans, whatever, that's always been equated with like pedophilia, right?
Uh huh.
Of like because it used to be that homosexuality or trans identities were considered deviant behavior, and so um, it gets lumped in with all these other mental illnesses, but it's not a mental illness. um,
Right.
because
And
I
up
keep,
until 1973, it was. And that's the
yeah.
wild part is that people don't know that history that like 50
So when
years ago, it was a mental illness.
right, and so now when people in the 2020s are saying, "Oh, well, these queer teachers are just grooming their students to want to boys to dress up in dresses and using all of these different bathrooms." I'm like, "Oh my God, they just want to use the bathroom. Just let them use the bathroom. It doesn't
It is
matter.
a
Just wash
literal
your hands."
bodily function.
Right. Just wash your hands. But that's a historical parallel. It's something that didn't really go away. They just called it something different.
Mhm.
Um, and it's still around. But that's where, if you have an awareness of that, you can teach people like, hey, you can spot the signs of here's where it's happening again. And it kind of it gets lumped in with uh, book bans and banning of certain teaching practices, which I th- I also feel, I know this is off topic, but it just pisses me off every time I see, well, they're teaching critical race theory in this school. I'm like, no, they're not. Critical
Yeah,
race theory is like at the graduate or doctoral level.
right.
that's that's not a thing.
Like
You're
we're not teaching theories at all. We're just
no
trying to get them through the fundamentals, man.
right. We're not, yeah, not teaching any theories. We're teaching facts.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I think that often gets lumped in with all these kind of the civil rights struggles. Um, we want rights for everybody. I can remember when same-sex marriage was coming before the courts, and God, I hope it doesn't come up again. Um,
Mhm.
but the opposition was, well, if you allow marriage to be more than just a man and a woman, then what's going to stop people from marrying animals? I'm like, oh God, that they always carry it to, I feel like conservative folks carry it to such an extreme, or the loudest voices do rather.
Right. It
That
is wild.
like it's not up for a debate. Why if your religion says marriage is between a man and a woman, that's fine, but that's the religion, that's not government. And then it goes back to we're not separating church and state like we really need to.
Especially at the moment.
Yeah, we put God on our money because we were afraid of godless heathen commies running around. But that also goes back to queer people were largely victims of that too. The House Un-American Activities Committee. Learn our history,
Yep.
folks. But yeah, I try to. That's kind of what we end up talking about sometimes in our GSA, because it's like I said in my answer form, we have this like three-way Venn diagram of social. It's a social group, there's a support aspect to it, and then there's an activist aspect to it, where I want to educate those kids who are in that group. So I'm like, y'all need to learn about this history, learn about where we've come from, because they'll even forget about the AIDS epidemic now, because the height of the AIDS epidemic was 30 years ago.
Yep.
So that's largely at risk of being forgotten.
And it's so wild because I'm not a huge proponent of like the television should be teaching us things, but I think that there are so many TV shows or Netflix series or whatever the service might be that are coming out that are about that era, period pieces about the 1980s and 90s and the height of the AIDS epidemic. And I'm just like, the good things are it's letting a new generation know that these things happen. The bad things are sometimes students think that Titanic was a movie and not a real thing. And so it's having to connect that dot that this TV show is
really
actually
happened.
like, it's something that really happened. It's just they've changed the names, they've changed the circumstances, but this is the same like through line for any number of people during that time period.
Well, and I'm glad that these stories are being told, and in some cases retold, because we have a deeper perspective on it. I think when shows from that were produced in the 90s come at it from a largely cis white area, like I can remember just anytime somebody had AIDS, they were a skinny white gay boy. I'm like, but more people got AIDS than just that, but I think that was palatable, which is why I kind of consider like my own identity a novelty, because I'm a cis white gay guy, right? I go, there's much more stories than me, so I'm glad to have the students that I have so I can elevate their voices. We've heard my story. we've heard that one. But there are way more out there, and so that's why I'm excited when a student goes, "Oh my gosh, I started watching Pose." I'm like, "Good. Now go and watch Paris is Burning."
Yeah, right.
Because Pose was, I loved that show so much. I really did. But that's also a dramatization. Go to the real story. So I like kind of scaffolding that. You start them off with something that can be enlightening. I do try to make sure that if I'm recommending something, that it's not like super graphic, because I think as queer teachers we kind of have to thread that needle a little bit. Where are they ready to see this material, where they're not going to giggle at it and kind of approach it how it's meant to be, because I know that I don't want a student go, why did you recommend this, and there's all this kind of cussing in it, naked people. I'm like, okay, no, I need to make sure that I avoid that. and do it in a safe way, but they can still, in a way that they can still learn how we got to where we are now. So I think if we don't recognize that, then we just end up repeating a lot of the same mistakes. We don't learn from any of that. So.
Yep.
Oh.
So before we wrap up, I want to ask you one final question. Basically,
Sure.
it is hard, especially right now, to be a teacher, but even more so to be a queer teacher in public eye. And so what advice or inspiration can you give to somebody who is like trying to just, I don't know, keep on keeping on or grow in this time frame, maybe based off of some of your experience the last couple of years, because the height of all of this is really happening in the moment right now.
Right. I think what I would offer to teachers, queer teachers especially, who may be teaching in an area or a school that isn't as supportive. I recognize that I am very privileged to have a supportive administration. I really am. That I'm able to thrive where I don't have to kind of tiptoe around them. We were able to produce a student drag show in the past year.
Oh,
I
sick.
was so happy about that. It did take a lot of discussion with we don't have a superintendent, we have a CEO. That's that
Right,
the
charter schools.
Oh yeah. That's again another like podcast series. But anyway, our CEO was very supportive once I explained what it was, and that's where I kind of come in with that knowledge and history of LGBTQIA plus, where I can take some of the stigma off of the word drag. So the advice I would give is educate yourself, because the more knowledge you have, the easier it is to in some ways defend it, but also to educate others, and hopefully it becomes less antagonistic and more of a discussion. um, I hope that you have the support of your administration. I know that in many places that is just not there. um, but one of the benefits of the past 2 years is, even though we were all disconnected in person, I am so excited to have connected with people all over the country and beyond. You connect with international teachers, but it's mostly while we were all at home, we started talking. We all started connecting with social media groups that are all sharing these resources. So that can become your support, right? If you can't lean on anyone at your school, lean on some of the friends that you made during the pandemic, right? That can make sure that you can feel confident in those times where you feel like you're the only person who's fighting for this, and you can feel attacked and you can feel just beaten down. Where you're not the only person who's going through that. There are plenty of other people who are going through the same experience that you're going through. So that's when you lean on those people. And hopefully it changes. I know it's a little trite now to say it gets better, but it doesn't always get better right away. It doesn't get better just by itself. It gets better when we all have to kind of do the hard work. So yeah, I hope that that you get the support that you need. And definitely parents too. If you can get parents on board, that's who your administration really listens to.
Yes.
They listen to parent voices more than our voices.
Yep. Absolutely.
Hey,
thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate that you joined me on the podcast.
I am too. It's fun. I like having these discussions, because then now that I know that someone on the other side of the country had a parallel experience that I did in the early 2000s.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, and I will see you around, right?
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Teaching While Queer. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing on your favorite RSS feed and sharing the podcast with your friends and family. New episodes will come out every other week during the school year. If you're interested in joining us on the Teaching While Queer podcast, please email us at teachingwhilequeerpodcast@gmail.com. Have a great day.